Book 2, Baku Jackie's Literary Corner. I am Jackie, and it's time for my bi-monthly wrap-up. So, I'm not going to talk about the books that I read for the first 2 months of 2025. So first, I will mention the ones that I didn't love, or that I thought were just okay, and I don't have a lot to say about them. So first, I did listen to the audiobook of Dissolution by C.J. Sampson. I thought that was okay. It was kind of a religious detective story. And maybe it's because I'm not as versed in that type of history, so it didn't mean as much to me. I did appreciate the full cast audio. That really helped immerse me in the story. And the main character was sympathetic. It kind of reminded me of, of the character Glokta from Joe Abercrombie's trilogy. I don't remember what that's called. But, it was just okay. It had a little bit of romance, it was intriguing. It was a criticism on the Tudor government. And it was just okay. It might just not be the right genre for me. Or maybe I would like it better if I had read more historical fiction like that, or maybe I would like it more if, I watched a movie, or... Anyway, and then the other two physical books that I read that were just a bit, kind of disappointing were Bellchamber and by Howard Sturgis and The Carlyles at Home. So, The Carlyles at Home was just kind of not a lot was going on. It wasn't very plot heavy. It was just this couple from the Scottish Highlands, the Scottish countryside, coming to the city of London and adjusting to city life and annoying neighbors and antics with pets and, having to hire neighbors and, having to hire maids and that not always going well. And, the renovations they had to deal with and just a lot of adjusting to this life. It was amusing at times, but just not satisfying of a story. And it was kind of, and I think I read this in February along with the other one. And it's disappointing because it's kind of sad because I was so excited to finally get a Persephone book. But I'm not gonna, keep it just because it's a Persephone book. I would rather, if I get a Persephone book, another one, I would want it to be something that I would want to read again. This is by Thea Holm, the author. And I think the Carlyles are real people in history. And then the other one, Bellchamber, was this young man, Sainty, who is the heir to his family. But he would rather live a more quiet, reserved life, talking philosophy with his friends, reading his books, and just hanging out with his mom. And he has to take on the family responsibilities. He has to keep an eye on his brother. He has to get married and all that good stuff that he doesn't want to do. But he has to. And his brother, he would rather pass on the responsibilities to his brother, who fits the mold of an heir, of a true male heir. And his brother is very reckless and irresponsible. And even the woman he's ends up marrying doesn't really love him, can't stand him. And he's being often judged and ridiculed for his hobbies and his, he has very effeminate hobbies, like he likes to read and cross-stitch, and he doesn't like sports. And it made me suspect that he is meant to be gay. They don't say it outright, but I felt like he was gay. And in fact, I read on someone's review that the author himself is gay, and maybe it's in the introduction, which I didn't read. And there were a lot of missed opportunities, I think, with exploring that, especially because of how society would react and how his mom is very devout. And I think I would wonder how she would respond to find out her son is gay. Would she try to convert him back to, being straight? would he be judged by society? I mean, he was almost too good of a character, like a too goody-goody. And I think the story would have been much more interesting if, like, Claude or Arthur or even Sissy, the woman he marries, would have been the main character. So yeah, basically my problem is I feel like there was missed opportunities with this one. Although it was well written. I mean, so was the other one, The Carlyles at Home. So okay, so now let's talk about the books that I did read and liked. Okay, so I completed what is that trilogy? God, I'm drawing a blank here. What is that trilogy called? I cannot. Oh my god! I just filmed I filmed this earlier, but I had to stop, and now I can't think of the title. Well, the third book in the trilogy was Flamebringer. It's a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, or at least the first one is, and the other two go beyond Pride and Prejudice and really explore this world. And this one, the bad guy finally comes to play, kind of reveals himself, but it explores their marriage. Alistair Dare, who is a dragon rider because it's a fantasy retelling of Pride and Prejudice, and Hearthstone trilogy is what it's called. And Eliza is our Elizabeth character, and it explores their marriage afterwards, the aftermath, after they get married and live happily ever after, supposedly, and see, with all this responsibility protecting this kingdom and their own issues and insecurities and having to accept that they're both only human. And they're kind of, in how Alistair has to, resign to the fact that his dad was not a saint. His dad was a human being who made mistakes, and that not everybody respects the dragon riders, and he needs to stop putting his family on pedestal, and he needs to figure out who he is as a warrior and as a husband now. And Eliza cannot protect him, and that's what she has to figure out, that she can still be a good partner to Alistair she doesn't have to be a warrior, but she can still be important and not just be what they call a Nakwa, which is the people that aren't the dragon warriors. And she can do her part. I really appreciate everyone coming together in the third book, finally meeting the bad guy officially, because we kind of got hints of him in the second one, but we don't officially meet him. And, going to the main capital of this world, and also characters that disappear in a book 2 come back in this one, Juliana and Anjay to be particularly. And I would love for Catherine White to explore those two characters after concerning what happens after the events of book 3 and how they deal with the aftermath, and seeing getting their own stories, I think would have been interesting. Because they proved themselves very capable, just like Eliza is. And I still love Topple. He's such a great character, such a fun character. Yeah, so it was a fun trilogy. I mean, I wish there was more to it. I wish it was a little bigger of a story, but it was still good, and I enjoyed it. So after that, I read Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. This is my third Jules Verne book. I don't know if I like this one better than Around the World in 80 Days, although I like the unique character relationship in this one between the uncle and the nephew. So we have Harry, and Professor Harwig is his uncle, and Harry is assistant to his uncle. And Harwig discover an Icelandic map to, as the title says, the journey to the center of the earth and this extinct volcano. And they go to that country where that is, hire a guide, Hans. I think it's Iceland they go to. And make the trek into this volcano, into the center of the earth, where there's exotic plants, there's still dinosaurs, there's a prehistoric man down there, and it's just this exciting adventure, exploration, and adventure story. I do like that the relationship between the uncle and nephew was very complicated and messy. Like, Harry admires and respects his uncle and wants to follow in his footsteps, but he's also, concerned about, their adventure. He loves his cousin. He's, in love with his cousin. He wants to marry. They want to get married, but there's a lot of, and his concerns on this quest, on this journey, are very valid, because they do run out of food and water. Harry himself gets lost and almost dies, and they don't know what they're gonna encounter. And his uncle's just like, oh, let's just focus on the adventure in this great place where no one else has ever been before. And it's not until Harry actually is put in danger that he realizes, oh, and actually shows his love for his nephew, his concern for his nephew's life. So yeah, they have a very interesting relationship. And I did get very frustrated and annoyed by Professor Hartwig because of that. But he was still a good character, Not a good person, maybe. Also, I wish we had, I feel like you can relate to Harry, because I think a lot of people would connect with this feelings about the situation. I think a lot of people would be in awe about this and think it's so cool, but at the same time, they would be worried about all those things that Harry is worried about. Though I do wish the guide Hans, we didn't really get to know his character. I feel like I didn't have any attachment to him, but I did get frustrated with him. How he treated the situation, how he just kind of ignored the situation, the dangers, and it was like, I'm just doing my job and I'm getting paid. And, I was very frustrated, but, Professor is paying him, so you can't blame him either, and he's been doing this for years. He makes a living off of guiding people on these adventures. So on the one hand, I kind of get it, but on the other hand, it doesn't make me any less frustrated. I do wish there were more dangers. Like, and it had more thrills, and and the fact that Harry is our narrator proves that we know he's going to survive. Unless the author Jules Verne was trying to do something clever with it, and be like, oh, Harry's actually a ghost. Like doing that kind of twist. He wasn't. So I think it takes away the tension a little bit that we know that Harry survives this whole thing. And I wish there had been more, like, thrills and dangers that they encountered, which they did encounter a lot. And I do think Jules Verne is more focused on the actual exploration and describing the world, which he did a great job at. I loved it. But it was at the expense of, like, there wasn't a lot, there were a lot of near misses where they almost got put in danger, but then nothing really serious happened except for, when Harry got lost. And yeah, they do run out of food and water, like I said, but, they resolve these situations really quickly. And, sorry, my blanket just fell off the back of my chair. But other than that, it was still a really exciting, really good story. I gotta say, the mushrooms really creep me out. Like, I get creeped out seeing mushrooms growing in the earth. Especially when there are a bunch of them in one big, huge pile. That is really gross. So the idea of the mushroom trees really creeps me out a little bit. And but yeah, it was good. It was a very engaging story, very fun story, and I will still continue to read Jules Verne. Although these are really short, surprisingly short, not that long compared to what I was expecting. Okay, so then after that, okay, I already talked about Dissolution. Okay, now we're gonna talk about American Senator. So this is a Trollope book and a standalone Trollope book. I had already So this has 3 plots to it. Our title character plot is this American senator, Elias Grotebed, comes to the small English village Dillsborough and stays with the diplomat John Morton, and Morton decides to take him on a fox hunt with a group of other men, and they discover a fox has been poisoned, and they immediately know who's responsible. This local farmer, and Elias Grotebed feels sympathy for this guy, especially when he finds out this guy's crops are being eaten by this fox, and that's why he killed the fox. And, but these guys, Morton and these other guys are like, why? Why do you feel sorry for him? You shouldn't. You should be on our side. And also the fact that he's American doesn't help. Elias Grotebed being American doesn't really help, because they're already, have judgments on him. And their judgments are supposedly confirmed by him helping this farmer. So that's the main plot. So the other 2 plots, for me personally, I think Mary's plot has more page time than Arabella's plot. But so we have Mary, who's the daughter of an attorney in the community, and she is being pressured by her stepmom to marry this Larry Twentyman, who is a rich landowner who does love her and seems like a decent guy at first. But she doesn't love him. She sees him more as a friend. And turns out she ends up meeting John Morton's cousin, Reginald, and is immediately taken with Reginald, but doesn't know how he feels about her. And he is in love with her. He falls for her, and neither one of them has told the other. They just try to be civil friends towards each other, especially because he thinks she's going to marry Larry Twentyman, even though he doesn't think he's worthy of her. And it's basically her trying to tell her mom that no, and everyone's saying, oh, reconsider, you should think about it. And she constantly flirts with Reginald, and, not in a playful way, but more of a, intimate, we have feelings for each other, but, we can't express them, or at least we think we can't express them. So it's very much a romantic drama, and I couldn't stand her mom. Her stepmom. I wanted to slap her. Meanwhile, we have the other plot where John Morton is engaged to Arabella Trefoil, who doesn't really, she's only marrying him because she needs a rich husband. And but when she gets there and goes to one of the parties in the community, she meets a Lord Rutherford, who is a lot wealthier than Morton. And while still being engaged to Morton, she starts flirting with Lord Rutherford and tries to convince him to persuade him into proposing to her, and then she tries to convince him that he did propose. So those are the 3 main plots. I was very entertained and amused by Grotebed's plot. I kind of felt bad for the guy because, these English aristocrats were giving him such a hard time and making it clear that they didn't approve of him getting involved in their community's politics. And they wanted to just take care of this farmer, and he wouldn't let them. And, but he wouldn't give up. He kept fighting for this farmer and being very persistent, no matter how many times Morton told him that, yeah, these people don't like you and they don't want you involved. And especially because he's American. And so I was very entertained that he was, and it really looks at the differences between the British culture and the American culture of this time period, and the clash between the two. And he does, Grotebed does realize that the farmer is not that great of a guy anyway. That they're not wrong about him. That he's not, but he still wants to help him because he still thinks he deserves justice for this fox eating his crops. And it becomes a really messy, complicated situation to where he really gets involved in speaking out for the justice for the lower class people of this community, and it gets kind of ugly. Meanwhile, I was a little bit more at times. I was also very much engaged in the other 2 plots as well, between Mary and Arabella, and how the 2 of them are trying to get by in the world, knowing that they have to get married. with mothers that are manipulative and trying to force them into situations they don't really want to be in. And it's interesting that Arabella is doing a lot of things that if a man did it, it would be okay. But if a woman does it, God forbid, and people like are very judgmental for her, especially the other women in this community. And although, yeah, I don't like how she goes about things at the same time, like how she tries to manipulate Lord Rutherford when he clearly did not propose to her. But then again, I'm not saying he's innocent. He is far from innocent because he agreed to being alone with a carriage with her. He flirted with her. He responded to her flirting, and even says, "Yeah, I love you too," kind of response. And you can't blame her for thinking that she had him hook and sinker. So both of them were unfair to the other. She was more deliberate, while he was just being a typical asshole who was like, I'm gonna flirt with this woman, but I want to be a bachelor forever, so I'm not gonna take her seriously. It's like, you dumbass. She needs a husband, and she's determined and desperate. And she thinks you're charming and likable and you're rich. But he still thinks he can get away with shit. And but yeah, she reminded me a little bit of Scarlett O'Hara in a way. I didn't appreciate how she treated John Warden, but later on she does show sympathy for him and does feel guilty about what she did because she refuses to call off the wedding, or at least call off their engagement, because he keeps giving her opportunities. He's like, okay, if you're not in love with me and don't at least want to marry me, then let's not get married. But she never gives him a straight answer. She just kind of dismisses the question. Like, I think if it didn't work out with Rutherford, I think she was wanted to make sure John Warden was still there and still available. I think that's why she never called off the engagement. That's my theory. That she was thinking, oh, well, if it doesn't work out with John Rutherford, if I can't convince him, then maybe I could still marry Warden. Because she still needed a wealthy husband. As far as Mary's concerned, I really feel bad for her. Like, she was struggling to stick to her principles, and like I said, I think she almost gave in a couple times, because she was being guilt tripped by both Larry and her stepmom, who were like, our family is in your hands, you gotta marry a wealthy man. And Larry Twain was like, I love you and I will treat you so wonderfully, and he was not a bad guy at first. It's just until later when you realize he's kind of being unfair to her and being kind of a jerk and being petty. Like, I get it, you got your feelings hurt being rejected by Mary, but she was still willing to be your friend. But I guess it kind of sucks when you're really in love with someone, head over heels in love with someone, and they just want to be your friend. That's kind of heartbreaking. But I don't know, I couldn't bring, no matter how angry I am at the person, I would keep my ranting to myself, and I wouldn't be petty. I would just pretend, either pretend or, like, just be honest with them. Or just be like, I need my space. Which he does. I mean, he does tell her, I need my space, but then he's still very petty, I think. But anyway, yeah, it was a lot of drama, but very entertaining drama. I still, I said I mean it when I say I do like both Dickens and Trollope, who are often compared to each other. Like, you're either a Trollope fan or a Dickens fan. And I guess at the end of the day, I think I do lean more towards Dickens. Because as much as I liked Trollope's plot in this book, sometimes I think I kind of prefer Dickens' plots. I guess because I'm a very plot-driven person, and I need a exciting, engaging plot, and this was still entertaining, engaging, but it was just a plot that you would see in a soap opera, like any other story, like soap opera with, it's just the time period, women were being pressured to get married, and there were all these rules of etiquette, and, people being confined by, that's not right, we shouldn't be doing that, that's not proper. Like, it's no different than a Jane Austen novel. Like, you could also compare Trollope to Jane Austen because she writes a lot of, all of her novels are very much about, you know, drama and relationship drama, romance drama, and all that, all that good stuff. But anyway, so we have that. Okay, so after that one, we have. Okay, this is a pretty heavy one, and heavy nonfiction book, but I think a lot of people should read it. But that is Lola's House, Filipino Women Living with War by M. Evelina Galang. I don't know if I'm. But, so, back in World War II, when Japan was trying to take over and create an Asian empire, they would take these beautiful women and keep them locked up, the soldiers, the Japanese soldiers, and assault them. And this is what happened. This is about the Filipino women, because they would do this, and Korean women and Chinese women and Vietnamese women and the Filipino women. So the author Evelina Galang and a group of young women back in, I think, in the 90s, they went to the Philippines to meet these women, and she heard about this and decided to go back and make this into a project. And she turned it into a documentary series, I think, and she and these young women got to know these Filipino Lolas, which are now grannies by now, and would talk to them and interact with them and make friends with them. And then were able to, until they got comfortable enough to share their stories with Evelina. And it's heartbreaking to hear these detailed accounts of what these women went through. And you hear these stories, and are to the point, and these women were so desperate to get these stories out because they weren't able to really talk about them when after it happened to them. In fact, some of these women had husbands that had the nerve to treat them like it was their fault that they got attacked in that way. And it really infuriated me as I read those parts when you hear about the women whose husbands would look at them in that way. And I was just, do you think they had control over that? Do you think they could have stopped these men? These were helpless women. These soldiers were probably much stronger than them. They were locked up in cages, and you treat them like it's their fault? Like, how dare they, let themselves be taken by a man? It wasn't just, a fun thing that they did, or they weren't just being, silly young women. They were attacked. And it just really was, it just infuriated me. But some of these women, they, not, the Tagalog is not the main language of the Philippine Islands. So some of these women would, either go from English to speaking in Tagalog, or some of the other, I don't know, I cannot remember or know how to pronounce some of the names of the other languages that were spoken in the Philippines. But yeah, they would be talking so fast, trying to get these stories out, that they would go back into their native tongue. Evelina and these other women were taken to the places. Some of these women some of the Lolas took Evelina and her friends to the place where they were kept as well. And there are pictures in here, by the way. There was one woman who just couldn't talk about it at all, so she made stitched a blanket for Evelina that depicts what happened to her. It's heartbreaking, and it's such a tough read. And it might probably make you cry a little bit. And, I think I did a review of this, just as I also did a review of Heartstone as well, by the way. And also, there were lighter moments, though, in the book. They would have meals together. These women would always be these Lolas would always be trying to feed Evelina, make sure she had food, and always have an opinion on her relationship status, and does she have a husband yet? So yeah, there were some lighter moments too, and it took a long time for Evelina to finally write this book and I think create the documentary, because it was very emotionally draining for her to, talk to these women and hear these stories as a Filipino American woman. I mean, for anyone, I think it would be draining, emotionally draining. And she struggled for a long time as she kept promising them that she would do it. She would write this book. And she just couldn't do it, like, at first, for the longest time. Also, for the longest time, these women had to protest. Because these Lolas were protesting because the Japanese wouldn't, for a long time, they wouldn't acknowledge what they did, what their soldiers during the World War II did. And for them, these women, it wasn't enough of an apology when they did acknowledge it a little bit. Like, they did acknowledge it, but it wasn't enough for them. And it's just a very hard read, And it's definitely one of those books you should, that has to do with World War II, that I definitely recommend reading. I mean, there's a lot of those books out there because it's a very popular topic in in both literature, whether you're talking nonfiction or fiction. And like what Ruta Sepetys writes, she writes about the parts of the world that aren't talked about as much. And I think this is a subject that is not visited as much either. So I definitely think you should read this as well. I think it's definitely a very important read. But it's a tough read, and like I said, there's pictures, there's photographs, and it might make you emotional. Okay, so then I finally read and finished The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. This was really good. A great start to this 4-book series, and this one is like telling a story of a revolution, basically. The way it's written is very, it's like telling you this famous, as if this, the author's telling you history. The narrator is giving you this history where these people don't rebel against the empire that is running things, and they are led by this young peasant boy named Kunigaru, and this nobleman, Mata Sindhu. And it's all not just about them rebelling against the government, but it's also about these two brothers. They're not literally brothers, but brothers in arms. And they have very different views of how to fight the enemy, and it's about their relationship and how to, and how this war affects them. There's also a lot of, talks of, it's known as a silk punk story, so it's like Asian, but it's like silk referring to the Asian culture, but then you have talking about, like, it uses the elements of like what steampunk does. So there's a lot of describing of machines and detailed description of that as well, and that can kind of be a little bit tedious especially if you're not interested in that subject, because he really goes into detail describing how things work, and those things are being used to fight in the war. There's a lot of scenes of strategy being discussed, and there's a lot of scenes where characters are kind of waiting around to see what the enemy's going to do next. And there's a lot of philosophy discussed in this book, and I'm noticing the philosophy discussions are even more involved in book 2, Wall of Storms. But I really like the characters, like, Kunigaru. He's so much fun and so likable and really caring, but he acknowledges his flaws, and he just wants to take care of everyone he cares about. And you have Manu Sindhu, who is a good guy. He's very honorable and has good intentions, but he's someone that's quick to have temper and he doesn't acknowledge his flaws as much as Kuni does. But he's not completely a monster. He's actually a decent guy, and he does care about people. And when he's pointing out that there are people who sacrificed for him, he doesn't feeling guilty, and he shows that he's still human, he still has compassion in his heart. And it was just a really great starting point for the series. And I had a really good time. It's probably not the kind of fantasy book for everybody, but I very much enjoyed it. So that is Grace of Kings, and I am reading the second book as we speak, Wall of Storms. Okay, so the last book I read in January which I read this all month, and that is Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Susann. And this is a book that really looks at the dark side of Hollywood, the ugly side of it, and what women will do to survive in Hollywood. You have our three main characters, Anne, who I would arguably say that she's the main protagonist. Anne Wells. She doesn't want to go into show business per se, like not the performing part, but she does want a career, want a job before she settles down. And she gets a job as an assistant to a lawyer for people who, people in show business. And she just tries to stick to who she is and be a good person, but she wants a life, a career before she settled down. She does want a family eventually, but she just wants to, live her life first and be independent. And she keeps being pressured to get married and settle down, and people don't understand why she doesn't want to, because it means she'll be taken care of, she'll be very secure, and have the good life. And why would she want to live in this independent life where she might not make a lot of money? And then we have Neely O'Hara, who wants to be a star. And she gets caught up in all that and becomes very, kind of slowly destroys her body and starts showing her selfishness and her narcissism, because I'm not an expert. I'm not a medical professional, but I do feel like she's has narcissistic tendencies. She's someone who never, has a temper, never is all about herself. It's never her fault. It's always someone else's fault, and she will turn on you on a dime if you make her look bad. But at the same time, she'll come crawling back to you. Like, she come crawling back to Anne several times when she was in need. And she was a character that at first I was like, oh, well, okay, she's not bad. She can be worse. And she does get worse. She is the one that becomes addicted to the pills, which the title refers to. They call them dolls. Although I also think that dolls, you could almost call these women, because dolls is an endearment for women back, and I feel like in a way these women, especially Neely and Jennifer North, the other main character that I haven't talked about yet, are like dolls for Hollywood to shape and for the public to shape and mold and to play with. And but Neely is such a horrible person. She becomes very selfish. And I just stopped liking her as a story because I began to hate her very strongly. And then we have Jennifer, who was a character that's actually really nice. She was still could be a little selfish at times, but she was, like, compared to Neely, she was actually not that bad. She was very caring. She just really cared about her image. And she was also kind of taking the pills too, the dolls, and she ends up going a very international career that, does really well. And while Neely is still struggling, like, having this up and down career where one minute she's beloved and the next she'll screw up and people hate her. And it's very much reflected with today, especially with cancel culture, and how, these people will be raised up and then they'll do something stupid and get in trouble, and then immediately the public turns on them. And this is the same thing, I'm not saying you have to feel sorry for them, but it's still kind of reflected in this book, I think. And the struggle for women is real. Like, they will do whatever they have to make sure they stay young and beautiful and thin forever. Even taking pills and slowly destroying themselves. And now we have plastic surgery that people can do. And the only difference is now we have social media, so people can be picked and prodded at a lot more easily. While, in this one, it was just the newspapers and public performances. Other than that, it was like, so and it hasn't changed much. But yeah, it does, I can understand where a lot of people say it felt very repetitive. That's a criticism this book gets. And it's a long book. It's not, but it's very easy to read, I feel like. It's not a hard read. And this particular edition was large print. I know, but it's very easy reading, but it can feel repetitive at times. And maybe I'm reading too much into it, but maybe the author was, and maybe, maybe I'm defending the author too much, but I wonder if the author was doing that on purpose because she's trying to make a point. If these characters kept making the same mistakes, they were just stuck in an endless cycle of screw up, especially Neely. And it's like, and by extension, because Jennifer wasn't around. She was like I think in France at the time. And they kept repeating the same mistakes. And maybe that's why the book felt, the author is being repetitive with things, like saying that it's like this vicious cycle that Anne and Neely just can't get out of. The guy that Anne was in love with, I liked him at first, but then he kind of disappointed me towards the end. And he ended up, everyone said, her boss and everyone else was saying, he's going to disappoint you, you shouldn't settle for him, you shouldn't love him, you move on from him, and she just couldn't. And he kept disappointing her. And he kept expecting a lot from her that he knew she didn't want to give. Like, and I'm not saying, like, oh, she's being selfish. I mean, some people might think she's being selfish, but she didn't want to get married. She wanted to first have a career. And have, and he kept trying to, everyone kept telling him, no one was listening to her when Anne was telling everybody that, no, I don't want to get married yet. Yes, I eventually do, and I want to have kids, but I don't want to get married right now. I want to have a career. I actually enjoy my job, and they kept saying that, oh, you'll change your mind later, or, oh, but this is the life that's meant for you. Or why would you want to stay in this? Why don't you want to get married? Because you'll have a husband that will take care of you. And I can see their points. But at the same time, like, you're not listening to Anne. That's not what Anne wants. Maybe in the future, like, it's not off the table for her. She does want a family event, get married and have a family eventually, but not now. And no matter how much you push her, it's not going to happen. So, yeah, that was very frustrating. But like I said, I would argue that Anne was the true main character of the story. We got a lot more perspective than the others, than Jennifer and Neely. But this was really good. I mean, like I said, it is a bit long, but it's very easy to read, I think. Okay, so after Bellchamber, because I read that one in February, I finally read Homecoming by Kate Morton. Yes, I finally read her newest book. So this one is about our main character, Jess. She works for a magazine, and she's running out of ideas. And while she's trying to contemplate what to write about next and how to make it personal, she gets a call from her that her grandmother, Nora, who raised her, has had a fall and is in a coma in a hospital. So she heads home, which is back in Australia. She's in England. And her friend, suggests to her that why don't you write about your experience going home and what that's like, because she hasn't been back in Australia in years. And so she ends up overhearing, while her grandmother is sleeping, she overhears her muttering about the past, about her brother Thomas, and about what happened in 1959. She doesn't get everything, but gets little hints of things, and decides to do some research and she begins to find out that something happened in 1959 with her brother, with her mom, with Nora's brother Thomas, and his young wife from England and their kids. And slowly pieces together how Thomas was gone on business, quote unquote business, back in that his young wife Isabel and their kids were found dead, and people believe that they were murdered. And how it's connected to Nora, how she was involved, as she was there at the time, and how it kind of influenced her over the years. So we have like Kate Moran's other novels, we have two timelines going on in this story. We have, the 1959 story and the present day storyline with Jess finding it all out, and we get the story of what happened in 59 from the day Thomas met Isabel and her coming, and what was going on that whole day before it happened, which was not just on was also on Christmas, and when these events took place. So I don't know what it is, but I love Kate Moran's books. They're very immersive and page turning. And she explores a lot of the same themes of houses, haunted houses. And I don't mean as in like scary haunted, I mean as in they have a past, and the ghosts are still there in a way, like metaphorically. Definitely not like the other book I listened to an audiobook this year, and which is the September House. That was clearly haunted house stuff, but and really explores the relationship between mothers and daughters, and what a mother will do for her children, and this and the relationship, and how people can let you down and disappoint you and not live up to your expectations, especially if you put them on a pedestal, and how the past, which I think all of her novels kind of explore this theme of how the past can influence the present, and it can change it. It can be the reason, the way the present situation, you turn down in the present. And it also, we have a small town, and how no matter, even in Australia, small towns can have dark secrets, and people gossip about it, and people can be warm and comforting, but then they can turn on you on a dime if they find out you might have done something that was bad. And it's a very heartbreaking story, and just seeing Jess's struggle, caught between her biological mother Polly and then her grandmother Nora, and just her, it's so hard for me to review stories that I love. I think a lot of people run into this problem where they struggle a lot more with reviewing stories that they absolutely love. And it was just, and I do wish that some of the characters that we were introduced to in the 1959 plot, we learned more about them, especially with what happened to them after the events of 1959. Some of them we did find out, but not all of them. There was one particular character, this teenage girl who had taken care of, who kind of took care of and babysat Nora's sister-in-law's youngest daughter. I got alone what happened to that girl. Just because I felt so bad how Nora was very, defensive when it came to her, and not defending her, but not liking that she was constantly taking care of the baby. And there was one point where they have a not so great encounter, and leaving a bad taste in Nora's mouth. But she was also she was a young girl. She didn't know any better. She just knew that she really loved and cared about this family, especially this baby. And she felt proud to be helping this woman take care of her little baby. I did do a good, and it was just, my review of the book that I wrote down is probably better than what I'm saying here. But yeah, I enjoyed this. But I always enjoy her books. So it's, I've never not liked a book. I mean, it was, I'm going to have to reread The Clockmaker's Daughter, the one that came right before this one, because I don't remember that one as well. And maybe I don't know if that might be a bad sign, but I might love it after I read the second time around. Okay, so after that one, I read my first Stephen King of this year, The Dead Zone. And this was, again, another really great Stephen King book. So our main character is Jimmy Smith. He is so when he was a kid, he had an accident where he got hit on the head with a hockey puck. I think it was a hockey puck, and he fell on the ice, and it caused him to have like blackouts and hints of visions of the future and everything. And sorry, just a spot on my back that's always itchy. But it's not strong. And then years later, as an adult, when he's a teacher and on like at the local fair with his girlfriend, who he loves very much, Sarah, after the date has some awkward moments, but it still goes well. He drops her off at home because she got sick, and he ends up in a car accident. And the driver, because he took a cab, gets killed, and Johnny ends up in a coma. And both Sarah and his parents think he's dead, but then 4.5 years later, he wakes up with psychic ability. He can touch people or touch objects and see visions of the future and of the past and get feelings. And most people have mixed, a lot of people either think he's conning people and it's a hoax, or some people think that it's legit. And once he leaves the hospital, they keep bugging him about it and send him things. But there are some people that he comes into contact with who are afraid after he touches them, but they do believe because they feel it when he comes into contact, and he seems to know things about them, and ends up being proven right. But then later on in the story, he also finds out, not only he finds out that there is this local politician he comes into contact with that has ill intentions and might become president in the future and could cause World War III. So I agree with a lot of people. This is a great Stephen King first book for you. It's not heavy on the supernatural elements. It's not a completely different world. It's our world. It does have some of his staples like religion. There's a religious character, and it does talk about politics, which, again, like our main character, our villain Greg Stolzen, is a politician in training, and he's not a likable guy. He's a disgusting guy, and clearly you're not supposed to like him. And Stephen King is not quiet about politics. I know that right now he's very vocal about his feelings on on what's going on right now. So, and it is in there. It's probably not as strong as it is it's probably not as strong as some of his books now, but it's in there. So, just to let you know, like, Mike from Mike's Book Reviews does explain it too, and he does a really good review of the book. And, he talks about how whether it, how you feel about it will depend on how you feel, if you agree with Stephen King or not on his political views. Unless you're just someone who doesn't care at all and just wants to enjoy a good story. Me personally, I'm just trying to enjoy a good story because I do like King stories. I do feel like Johnny is very relatable as a main character. I mean, I imagine a lot of people would react the same way he does. Like, first of all, imagine waking up, like, going into a coma in the 90s and then waking up in the early 2000s and seeing how much the world has changed and having to adjust to that. It's pretty hard. And not only that, but then waking up with a psychic power where you can't touch people or you're going to have psychic vision. And just, like, that's got to be tough and heartbreaking and scary too. Especially because people will react with you. Either they'll think you're just conning everybody and just being an asshole, or they might be just plain scared of you, even if they do believe what you can do. They might be scared of you, or they might just not leave you alone, continuing to bother you because they need your help. Like his own doctor, who does care about him, respect him, because of his ability, he does get, suggest him to Sheriff Bannerman of Castle Rock, who's trying to solve this case of a serial killer who's strangling women, and attacking them sexually. He gets him involved, and at first, like, Johnny doesn't want to get involved because he feels like this power is ruining his life and is a curse on his life. But he does, because he starts to realize that some of the victims are little girls. And so he does get involved. And, it does ask the question of, if you know these things, do you get involved? Or if you get involved, are you going to make it worse? Or can you just ignore it? And if you ignore it, can you live with the guilt if something bad happens? If you don't stop it, it looks at that question. At one point, after he finds about Greg Stoltzen and trying to decide what to do about that, first of all, there's the fear of how people are going to react if he does do something drastic. And also, people, and then there's also the fear of, is what he does, is it going to result in not just personal consequences for him, but for everybody? And so he asks people the people he has left in his life, he asks them, okay, because he can't downright tell them what he knows about Greg Stoltzen, so he kind of poses that, would you kill Hitler? If you could go back in time and stop Hitler, would you? And it's, on the surface, seems like a very easy, obvious answer. Because he committed genocide. He killed a lot of innocent people. All for the sake of what he believed people should be like. So at first it seems obvious, but then as you really think about it, it's like, you really, would you? You say that you would, but there are a lot of things to consider here. Yeah, this man probably does deserve to go to hell, but, it's actually a lot more complicated than people think. But yeah, I really, I really like the characters. Greg Stoltzen is a great villain because he thinks he's a good guy. He thinks he's doing the right thing, and he's not. It's at the expense of other people. And it isn't until later in the book where he makes a mistake that he screws things up and people begin to realize that he's not great. After that part, when finally his true colors are revealed, I was like, dude, what's wrong with you? Why did you do that? You basically just threw yourself under the bus. But he's still a really good villain. I think the mark of a good villain is one that doesn't see themselves as a villain, thinks what they're doing is they're the good guy, that what they're doing is right and makes sense and is a good thing. Or at least the right thing. Also, I really liked King is just really good with characters. I feel like he's good with making you hate or love a character. Or, and there are some characters that you're kind of in between. His mom, Johnny's mom, I felt bad for her because this was her one and only child, and thinking he might have been dead. Well, actually, no, she thinks God's going to bring him back. God told her son's going to come back to her. And he does wake up. So that's when these things were, maybe she wasn't entirely wrong. But then some of her beliefs, she is King writes about these people a lot. I mean, there was only maybe one that I can recall. I'm sure there are others out there somewhere, but there was one religious character that I actually thought was a decent person, a good person, and a likable person, and not completely crazy. And that was in his Rose Red miniseries. Kathy was religious. She was a Christian. And she was actually mellow. I mean, she was terrifying the situation they were in. But compared to some of these other religious characters, she was actually a decent human being about it. She wasn't crazy and obsessive about it. She just had strong faith and believed in God and prayed to God to get her out of the situation that they were in, to help her survive. And as far as I know, that's the only one I can think of where she was mellow with her religious beliefs. But, Johnny's mom was, at the same time, she wasn't, she was a zealous, but she was, and very devout, but she was not, mean. She was just kind of expounding her beliefs, and even to someone who I do believe in God, obviously you're I don't know about that. That's a little bit much. I don't know if I agree with that. I don't think that's gonna happen. She's talking about the end of the world and that God was gonna send a spaceship to take everybody back to heaven or wherever. So some of her beliefs were, and it's hard to look at a gift like Johnny's at this power as a gift, as a blessing. Like, she looked at it as a blessing that, you could help people. And I mean, she sort of kind of convinces him, like, later, but he's still, like, it's hard to look in because he feels it's kind of ruined his life a little bit. People are scared of him. He can't touch anyone without seeing visions, and it's heartbreaking, and it's like, and a lot of responsibility and pressure is put on him if it's the case, and he was blessed with this for a reason, and it's scary, and he could die. So and I can see where someone like that would look at it as like, it's not a blessing, it's a curse. Why are you putting that on me? But other than that, but she, like I said, she wasn't that bad about it. She was actually very kind and loving, and just was giving ideas. And sometimes she was a little manipulative with her husband and everything when, questioning his faith. You'd be like, that person who gets a little whiny and is like, you're being mean to me, and, how dare you, it means you don't love me and you don't love our son, and that kind of thing. That, so she was still not great, but it wasn't as bad as, like, let's say Carrie's mom, for instance. She was batshit crazy. But but his dad balanced it out, because his dad was very supportive, and he was such a great, nice guy, and very sweet, and really cared about and loved his son, and wanted to do what's best for him. I liked Sarah too. I can understand I feel like she's relatable. It's like, yeah, she does cheat, but I think you kind of understand where she's coming from, because she's always going to be wondering what could have been with Johnny. Like, the lost years that they had. You can kind of understand why she might have given in to cheat on and be with Johnny, at least for once. That's what she does later, and it's kind of sad, a kind of bittersweet moment. But, also, I really like that young man that he tutors, because at one point he can no longer be a regular teacher, and he becomes a private tutor. I like the kid that he tutored, and his dad. They were actually, not that bad. I mean, the very likable and very good friends to Johnny, and so, yeah, this was really good, and it's not that long either. So I know that a lot of Stephen King's books are super long, unless you're reading something that's one of his shorter works, like his novellas or short stories. But if you want to read one that's a little bit longer, but not super long, then this is another one that's good. Misery's another good one. But yeah, so that is The Dead Zone. Okay, I have one more book to go. The last book. Oh, wait, I got 2 more books to go. So I listened to another audiobook, and that is The September House, which is probably more of a autumnal read, because it's about a haunted house. And so we have our main character, Margaret. Margaret and her husband, Hal, just find their daughter's left for college and is living her own life with her girlfriend. Margaret and Hal decide to move on and they find the perfect Victorian house for themselves, and they move in there. But here's one little catch. Not only is it a fixer-upper, but the house is haunted. But somehow Margaret actually makes it work. She refuses to give up this house. She loves it too much, even though Hal insists, and finds a way to work with the ghosts to deal with them. There's only really one ghost that's a true threat in her mind. I mean, there's one little boy ghost who bites people, so he causes a little bit of, but he's not as bad as this ghost that lives in the basement, a Master Vale. So she sets all these rules and boundaries, and she's used to making rules, because you find out throughout the story that her husband is an alcoholic, and he's abusive. And he ends up missing and disappearing, and the daughter, whose name escapes me at the moment, I feel bad that I can't remember her name, she it becomes worried when she doesn't hear from her dad in a long time. You know, they don't have much of a relationship. Every so often they'll still talk on the phone. And so she insists on coming to visit her mom, and they're gonna do investigation and find out what happened to her dad, even though Margaret is like, oh, it's okay, he left, I'm not worried, he'll come back eventually. And Margaret is very worried that her daughter will have to deal with the ghost and encounter them. So she, and it's all about them. Her daughter comes and they go and travel to find out what happened to her dad. And it doesn't go well. And there's a lot of tension between mother and daughter because the daughter doesn't understand why Margaret never left her husband and is very frustrated and angry at her mom. And she starts to suspect, because the ghosts kind of do get, Margaret starts seeing the ghosts. They kind of make appearances here and there, even though she told them to stay away. And her daughter suspects that her mom might be losing it, that she might have, have Alzheimer's or dementia at least, or that she might have mental health issues because of her abuse. So this was actually another one that was kind of like, I kind of mixed feelings on. I mean, it was kind of fun. Like, I like how lackadaisical that Margaret is with the ghosts. Like, she talks to them like they're her friends. She connects with them, especially this one ghost, this Frederica, that she forms kind of a bond with. And she definitely, really forms a relationship with these ghosts, and she kind of understands them. Fortunately, she seems to be the only one next to Hal who can see them, and it's, but that was kind of fun. It's very much one of those horrors that loosen, and it has a lot of dark humor mixed with this very serious issue of disgusting domestic abuse. And it does, Master Vale was creepy and a little bit terrifying. I mean, he was the only scary ghost, so it's definitely not for someone who's looking for, a scary, terrifying ghost story. I mean, it does have its moments, but it's definitely more it kind of reminds me of A House with Good Bones, which I was looking at people's reviews, and they felt like A House of Good Bones dealt, that the house that they compared A House with Good Bones to The September House, and they have a similar plot, the same kind of plots, except from different perspectives. And in their mind, they definitely think A House with Good Bones did it better, and I don't know, I think so too. I kind of agree with that. But I didn't hate this book. I actually enjoyed it at parts. But I did get extremely annoyed and frustrated with both Margaret and her daughter. The daughter was just insufferable and frustrating. She was just so obnoxious about things. And I understood that she was worried about her mom, and she was angry at her mom for the way she let her dad, Hal, abuse her. And she was very frustrated with her mom. And she had anger issues. She acknowledges that. She's afraid of that she'll be like her dad, who also had anger issues, but at the same time, she was so pushy and just would not leave her mom alone, and the mom was in denial land. I can't begin to imagine what it feels like to be in an abusive relationship, and I admire the mom for doing everything she could to protect her daughter. Her one rule was, Hal always set the rules, but she had her own one rule, which is you do not go after our daughter. Our daughter was off limits. And you do find out in a flashback that he did. And you find out that's the reason why, the daughter has kind of not been in their life, has taken her own separate path in life, and barely is involved with her parents. But the mom was just kept making excuses. And I was just getting really frustrated with her and be like, no, this is not okay. Of course, like I said, I have never been in an abusive relationship, so I don't know how hard that is and what that's like. So, to be fair, even though on the one hand, I was frustrated with her. On the other hand, maybe, I can understand that's her way to deal with it. And she's afraid of Hal, probably, and doesn't, it's just like, and there are a lot of people, like, one of the reviewers pointed out that that's how it is. Like, you'll, always justify it and say, because there will be moments, brief periods where he's actually, that person, the abuser, is actually kind to you and nice to you. So you're just like, oh, well, there are times when he's actually nice. So, so maybe I'm not being fair to Margaret's character. But I'm not going to lie and say I didn't get annoyed and frustrated with her. And, was often yelling, like, as if the characters were in the room where I was physically with the characters. I did like the ghosts, but like I said, they're not super scary. There was really only one that is really actually scary, and that is, Master Vale. We do get little pieces of backstory, which I always like learning the ghost backstory, so we do get some of that. I would really love to see that house. I think, the way they described it, it seems so beautiful and so great, and like probably really grand back when the ghosts weren't dead. Like, it seemed like I can understand where people were like, oh, this is such a great house, but why did Hal not want to live here anymore? And it was, but yeah, it was just so, and like I said, it does deal with the heavy topic of abuse, and it does go into, like, and it is one of those books where you can't necessarily rely on Margaret. So that was, she seemed like an unreliable narrator. That, and it is nice to, she's unreliable not because she herself is a drunk, which I feel like for a while we were seeing a lot of that, where there was the unreliable narrator. Oh, it's like, it was because she was abused and maybe, blocking out things and losing her mind because of the abuse she experienced. I was towards the end of the book. The only thing that really bothered me, and it's hard to talk about this because it spoils the ending. But I was worried that, it's very hard to talk about this because the one thing that did bother me, there was one aspect of the book that bothered me that I didn't like, which was, like, you think it's implied that one thing, but then it turns out to be, oh, it's actually not that way. You're just it's in, it's not really that way. But then later on, but by the end of the story, by the big climax, you find out, wait, actually it is this way. Like, if that story, basically all I'm going to say is, those kind of stories where it's like, is this person crazy or not? Those kind of stories. That this was one of those stories where, is she crazy or is this really happening? Kind of one of those. It's just so hard to talk about it because I don't want to spoil anything. If you're going to check out this book. I mean, how the ending turned out was, I was happy, but I was worried it was going to go in another direction. So that's the thing that. Okay, so that was I like the narrator, good narrator, by the way. So it was, the narrator did a good job about saying, like, the young daughter and the much older mother. I think she did a good job with that. And I think, a lot of people I think can relate to the aspect of being a young woman and having to take care of your mom, your elderly parents, and that push and pull and that struggle. I think a lot of people could, if you like haunted house, if you are kind of can relate, like, have been in that kind of situation, I think if you are cool with the whole supernatural element and stuff, then you might be able to connect to the story. If you're like, it kind of, there were times when it made me think of, like, people that I know that are in that kind of situation a little bit. Okay, so the last book I read before March was the first novel that Kurt Vonnegut published, which was Player Piano. And this one reminded me a lot of Fahrenheit 451, 1984, The Circle, and Brave New World. It had similar things about, the fears of machines taking over and losing our humanity and giving and, like, sacrificing ourselves to to machines, because you have this world where our main character, Paul Proteus, he lives in a world where machines are in control. So kind of like how, our fear of social media taking over, us being completely consumed by social media. I mean, that's why I think probably because The Circle by David Eggers was written more recently, I think that's a lot closer to how things are now in our society, how we're spending most of our time on social media. While this one, like 1984 and Brave New World and Fahrenheit 451, it's a fear that is close but not exactly how things turned out. But Paul is starting to question things and kind of is regretting that he's letting machines run his life. And he has all these people kind of pushing and pulling him, and like his former friend who everyone thinks is most people don't like his wife and boss just don't trust him and thinks he's the enemy and think he's a bad person, he's a bad influence. And then you have his wife who wants him to rise up in his career, and she likes her comfortable life, and she comes from the lower class and doesn't want to give that up, and she's very insecure. And then you have his boss who was trying to be like, you want to be like your dad and live up to your dad's name and, follow in his footsteps. And as he rebels and starts to realize, I don't know if I like this life. People are like, they don't believe him. They don't trust his judgment. Like at one point he buys a farmhouse for him and his wife. It's very old fashioned. And his wife, he shows it to his wife who likes collecting that kind of stuff. And she wants to bring it home with her. And he's like, no, I'm told that it has to stay here and has to stay the way it is. And she's like all shocked. And he's like, oh my God, we have to take care. We have to go the old fashioned way. No machines. And then she proceeds to be like, I love you, honey. And you're not going to do that. You say you will, but you won't. You'll always stay loyal, and you can't live without machines any more than I can. And she just tries to convince him that he's not going to do this. And he pretends to play along with her all the way towards the end of the story, and it doesn't, or before the end of the story, and I should say at least up until a point. And it really, like I said, it really looks at our fears of we'll lose our humanity and appreciate the simpler things in life. Like reading a book, playing outside, working with our hands, doing everything for ourselves, operating things without a machine, like interacting with other people, and just doing things on our own with our own, feeling proud that we've accomplished something on our own. And not just let some machine do it for us. And the personal and being, interacting with other humans. And there's a lack of personalness to machines. You can give them the data and the numbers, but they're machines still. They don't have feelings. They're just machines and they're just doing a job. And it's that fear of letting those machines take over. And the people, our government the government in the story is like, well, they point out that machines have benefits. Things we can't do, the machines will do for us. And this class system is very much focused on IQ. So if you have a lower IQ, if you have an IQ under 100, then you're going to the labor class, the other, the people who still do work with their hands. And then but if you have a higher IQ and can fix the machines and build them and everything, then you're of a higher class. You can have an office job, and you have the good life, and you have a nice house. And so I thought that was interesting that they look at, classify people via your IQ, how smart you are. And I think this is another one that I really enjoyed that looks at those kinds of concerns. Even though, this is not, it's close to what has happened to our society, how we spend all of our time using computers and are looking at our cell phones. But, I mean, these people could not imagine how far we would go with machines. they couldn't begin to imagine that the laptops and iPads and cell phones, and particularly iPhones, and iPods and all that, and streaming networks where you can watch, like, you have particular networks that instead of cable TV, you have streaming networks where there's limited commercials, just a bunch of ads. They probably couldn't imagine that we would come to this point. I mean, they had an idea, and they did. Obviously, these authors like George Orwell and Ray Bradbury and Aldous Huxley and Kurt Vonnegut, they were worried about it, but they couldn't get as specific as like David Eggers did. David Eggers is probably the closest, but he wrote that in early 2000s, so it makes sense because he had a better idea of where we were going. Let me see when he. Yeah, this was around the 50s. Yeah, this was around the 50s and published again in the 80s. So he couldn't even begin to imagine. I mean, this was probably more inspired by the future of where we were in the 50s. But yeah, I definitely, if you like those stories that kind of look at, that are kind of dystopian and look at the possible futures, and I think this is really fun and worth a read. Especially like if you like those books I just mentioned, then I think you might like this one too. So that was the last book I read in February, and currently I just finished my biography about Tolkien, and I'm kind of trying to, get myself involved in actually officially participate in March of the Mammoths. Although I am listening to Tracy Deon's Legendborn, the first book. I believe it's a trilogy. I'm listening to the first one on audiobook via Libby. I'm liking it so far. And I am currently reading Lord of the Rings, and I picked up All the Light That Falls. And last night I was reminded while reading the author's Ryan Cahill's newsletter that I gotta read the second book. So I decided to put aside Blackwater and go start that one, and I won't come back to Blackwater, which would apply to March of the Mammoths. Blackwater would too. So that's all the books I'm currently going in now. I did decide in, as a Methodist Christian, I was feeling motivated to, with my mom's encouragement, I felt motivated to read the Bible. So originally I wanted to buy the Penguin Classics edition, but I finally decided, I'll just buy this, those study Bibles that they have. So I got that. So I am reading that. I don't, you guys might not want to hear me talk about it, but I might mention it a little bit more than I usually do, because I know if it kind of applies, like just with Dead Zone, Stephen King will often talk about have religious characters in his books, including, the mom in that one, Johnny's mom. And that's the only time so far I've ever mentioned, my religious beliefs. But I understand if you don't want me to talk about the Bible, but I am currently reading that at the moment. And I'm using a study guide, so I'm not reading it just the way you read a normal book. Kind of, But anyway, I hope you guys had a good first 2 months of 2025. Would love to know what you're currently reading right now. And I'm probably not going to film any more today because I filmed this like 3 times. I don't even know if this one is going to show up, and I'm going to be mad if it doesn't, and it won't matter because if it doesn't, you guys won't see it. So I hope you guys, if this films everything and shows, I'm able to upload it, then I hope you guys enjoyed your reading, and I hope you were cool with my wrap up. I liked this wrap up, and love to know if you enjoyed any of the books I read, if you read them, or if they sound interesting to you. And I will talk to you all later. All right, bye.